The Poor Girl and the Billionaire CEO. Written by Friday Johnson. Performed by James Gert.
Evelyn Carter sat in the cramped airplane seat, the edges of exhaustion pressing down on her like a thick fog. Her eyes fluttered shut, the rhythmic hum of the plane almost lulling her to sleep. The weight of her son, Lucas, slung in her arms, added to the fatigue that had settled deep into her bones. The job interviews had been a disaster. Another round of rejection, another round of failure. The bills she couldn't pay loomed large in her mind, her apartment's peeling wallpaper mocking her every time she walked through the door. Her fingers absently brushed Lucas's soft hair as he lay peacefully against her chest, the only comfort in her life. The image of her little boy, his wide, trusting eyes, gave her the strength to keep going. But today, even he couldn't quell the despair that filled her heart. The plane began its descent, but the sudden jolt as it shifted made Evelyn's body lean to the side. She let out a small gasp, her head tipping toward the broad shoulder beside her. She barely registered the movement before her eyes fluttered shut once more, and she sank into a brief, fragile slumber. When she awoke, she was not alone. Her cheek was pressed against a stranger's shoulder, his body firm beneath her. She sat up in a jolt, wide-eyed and mortified. A quick glance at the man confirmed her worst fears. She had fallen asleep on a complete stranger. His face was familiar, though, stirring a deep sense of recognition in her gut. She quickly sat back in her seat, adjusting her disheveled hair in a futile attempt to recover some semblance of dignity. The man shifted slightly, his gaze moving toward her. His eyes were dark, sharp, calculating, and yet there was something about the way he looked at her that made her pause. He wasn't annoyed, as most people would be in her position. Instead, he regarded her with a sort of detached curiosity, as if her discomfort was nothing more than a fleeting detail. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice smooth, confident, like it had been molded for boardrooms rather than casual conversation. Evelyn stammered, her mind racing. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to." "No harm done," the man interrupted, his lips curving into a small, almost imperceptible smile. "But you look like you've had a long day, a long few days, actually." She blinked, unsure whether his comment was just an observation or if he knew more than he was letting on. Evelyn couldn't place it, but the man's eyes seemed to be scrutinizing her, as though he could see right through her. The realization hit her like a slap to the face. This wasn't just any man. This was James Harland, the CEO of Harland Technologies, one of the wealthiest and most influential men in the country. His name had been on the headlines countless times, his face plastered on the covers of business magazines. Harland Technologies had reshaped the tech industry, making James Harland one of the most powerful men alive. And yet there he was, sitting beside her, a woman whose life was a far cry from the glossy, high-end world he belonged to. Evelyn swallowed, her pulse quickening. "James Harland," she whispered under her breath, barely believing the words. He raised an eyebrow, his expression impassive. "Yes, that's me." She quickly averted her gaze, suddenly self-conscious. What could a man like him possibly want with a woman like her? Lucas stirred in her lap, his small hands reaching up to rub his eyes. He yawned loudly, his innocent face glowing with the pure, untainted energy of youth. Evelyn's heart tightened as she brushed a lock of hair from his forehead. "Mom?" Lucas mumbled sleepily, his voice thick with the haze of slumber. Evelyn gave him a soft, reassuring smile. "We're almost home, sweetheart." James Harland observed them silently for a moment, his eyes lingering on Lucas before shifting back to Evelyn. She couldn't quite place the look in his gaze. Was it interest? Sympathy? There was something there, but it was fleeting, almost imperceptible. As the plane began its final descent, the tension between them thickened, but there was no escape from the shared space, no chance to retreat into the safety of her own thoughts. Evelyn could feel the weight of his presence, like the pressure of a storm building on the horizon, impossible to ignore. The plane touched down with a soft thud, and the seatbelt sign flashed, signaling that passengers could now stand and gather their belongings. Evelyn rose stiffly, still trying to shake off the sense of discomfort that lingered after their brief exchange. She looked at James once more, unsure of what to say, but before she could speak, he handed her a small folded business card. The cool edges of the paper were sharp against her fingertips. "You've got more to your story than you realize," James said quietly, his voice barely audible above the noise of the plane. "Let's talk." Evelyn stared at him, her mind spinning. She didn't know what to make of the words, didn't know why he had given her the card. But before she could respond, the flight attendants began urging everyone to deboard, and the moment passed. With one last lingering glance, she stepped into the aisle, her son in tow, the business card burning a hole in her hand. Her phone rang just as she was about to exit the gate. "Hello?" she answered, her voice shaky. The voice on the other end was cold, threatening. "I know what you've been hiding, Evelyn. You can't run anymore." Her breath caught in her throat. The words felt like ice water seeping into her veins. Who was this? What did they know? She didn't have time to answer before the call abruptly ended. The world around her seemed to freeze for a moment, the air thick and suffocating. Her pulse raced as she tried to make sense of the cryptic warning. "Mom?" Lucas's voice broke through the tension. "Are we going home now?" Evelyn squeezed his hand tighter, trying to calm the storm that was suddenly raging in her chest. She nodded, her gaze unfocused, as she tried to process everything. James Harland's cryptic words, the strange phone call, and the growing fear that someone knew her secrets. Something was happening, and Evelyn had no idea what it was, but she was certain it was just the beginning. She moved through the airport in a daze, the weight of the world pressing down on her, and for the first time in a long while, she wasn't sure she could outrun it.
As Evelyn and Lucas made their way through the crowded airport terminal, the noise of 1,000 hurried footsteps and voices seemed to blur into a single indistinct hum in her ears. She was still gripping the business card tightly in her hand, the edges digging into her palm as though it were a lifeline or a noose. Her thoughts kept circling back to James Harland, the man she had fallen asleep on, the man whose business empire spanned continents, whose name was synonymous with power and success. Why had he spoken to her like that? What was it he thought he saw in her? The business card in her hand felt like a riddle, the cryptic words scrawled on it haunting her thoughts. "You've got more to your story than you realize." The words replayed in her mind, but she couldn't make sense of them. What story was he referring to? What was she missing? Lucas tugged on her sleeve, breaking her out of the whirlwind of thoughts. "Mom, are we getting a taxi?" Evelyn forced a smile, kneeling to his level. "Yeah, sweetheart. Just a minute." She took a deep breath, trying to push aside the unease that had settled in her chest. The stranger's words, the phone call, it was too much, too fast. But there was nothing she could do now except take Lucas home. That was her priority. Always. Later that evening, Evelyn sat in the dimly lit living room of her small apartment, the creaking of the floorboards echoing as she paced back and forth. Lucas had fallen asleep on the couch, curled up with his favorite blanket. The apartment, though small and worn, was filled with the familiar comforts of home. A mismatched couch, a coffee table that had seen better days, and a few framed pictures on the walls of happier times. It was far from perfect, but it was hers. But tonight, it felt different. The air felt heavier, suffused with an undeniable tension. The stranger's call earlier, the cryptic business card, it all swirled in her mind, leaving her restless. She tried to focus on something else, anything else, but her thoughts kept returning to that man, James Harland. Why would he take an interest in her? A woman whose life was unraveling, who barely had enough to pay her bills, let alone entertain the idea of a conversation with someone like him. She knew about Harland's reputation. He wasn't someone who mixed with the common folk. His world was filled with board meetings, private jets, and luxury, while hers was confined to the constant struggle of survival. Her fingers absent-mindedly traced the edges of the business card, the raised lettering almost taunting her. She sighed and set it down on the table, pacing again, her mind racing. The phone call was still lingering in the back of her mind like a shadow, creeping in when she tried to focus on something else. She didn't know who had called, or why they'd made such a cryptic threat. It was a warning, and it felt far too personal to be a random act. Her phone buzzed suddenly, cutting through the silence of the room. Startled, she grabbed it, hoping for some distraction, but the text that flashed on the screen only made her stomach drop. It was an unknown number. "We need to talk. This isn't over." Her blood thudded against her chest. Panic surged in her veins. The words were unsettlingly familiar, just like the phone call earlier. This wasn't some random threat. This was something deliberate. Whoever was behind it had to know something about her, something she wasn't prepared to confront. The following day passed in a blur, and Evelyn found herself standing at the small, cramped coffee shop near her apartment, waiting in line for her usual morning fix. The smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, but Evelyn couldn't focus on anything except the persistent nagging feeling that something was about to change. As she approached the counter, her phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a text message, it was an email. Her fingers hesitated as she unlocked her phone, her nerves tightening. She didn't want to open it, but she did anyway. The subject line caught her eye. Harland Technologies, Potential Opportunity. She swallowed hard and opened the email. The message was simple, almost too simple. "Dear Evelyn Carter, after our brief encounter on your recent flight, I believe we should have a more in-depth conversation. Please find the time to meet at your earliest convenience. Best regards, James Harland, CEO." Evelyn stared at the email, disbelief setting in. A meeting? What did he want with her? Was he just being polite, or was there something more to this invitation? It was clear from his words that he wasn't offering a job. He was offering something else, something more personal. She stood there for a moment, unsure what to do next. She couldn't shake the sense that everything was shifting, that the small, predictable world she'd carefully constructed was on the verge of cracking wide open. The barista called her name, pulling her from her thoughts. She grabbed her coffee with a half-hearted thank you and walked to the corner of the shop, her mind still buzzing with uncertainty. Was this a chance she couldn't afford to pass up, or was it a trap? Her phone buzzed again, this time an unknown number. She answered it without thinking. "I've been waiting for you to make a decision. You can't hide from this anymore." Her blood ran cold. Another warning. Whoever this was, they weren't going to let her off the hook. That afternoon, Evelyn sat on her worn-out couch, staring at the blank screen of her laptop. The meeting with James Harland. Should she go? Part of her felt compelled to follow through, but the other part of her, the one that had always trusted her instincts, told her to stay away. But it was too late to turn back now. Whatever James wanted, whatever game he was playing, it had already begun. The stakes were higher than she'd ever realized, and she was standing at the edge of something she didn't fully understand. She opened her email and responded to James's invitation. "I'll meet you tomorrow. Where and when?" As she pressed send, Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Whatever was coming, she wasn't ready, but she had no choice but to face it.
The small apartment felt colder than usual, though it had nothing to do with the temperature. Evelyn stood by the window, gazing out at the dreary city below. The sky was overcast, the grayness mirroring the weight pressing on her chest. She had spent most of the morning looking over the pile of unpaid bills scattered across the kitchen table, trying to figure out how to keep the electricity on and buy enough food to last the week. The ever-growing pile of debt was a constant reminder that her world was slipping out of control. Her fingers brushed the edge of a worn-out picture frame, Lucas smiling in his Halloween costume from last year. He was only 4, but the light in his eyes made her heart ache. She had promised him a better life, a future that was more than this suffocating existence. But with each passing day, it felt like that promise was slipping farther out of reach. She sighed deeply, turning away from the window. The apartment was silent except for the occasional creak of the floorboards or the soft hum of the refrigerator. It was a silence she had grown used to, one that had settled over her like a blanket of exhaustion. The loneliness was deafening, but it was something she had learned to live with. Just then, her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a text message from an unknown number. "Evelyn, it's James Harland. I hope you're doing well. I would like to offer you a position with Harland Technologies. Please call me when you have a moment." Her heart skipped a beat. James Harland. The name echoed in her mind, the weight of it carrying a power she couldn't deny. The CEO of Harland Technologies, the very man who had given her the cryptic business card on the flight. Her fingers hovered over the phone for a moment before she pressed the call button. The line rang once, twice, before a smooth, familiar voice answered. "Evelyn," James said, his tone calm yet strangely intimate. "I hope I haven't caught you at a bad time." Evelyn's throat tightened, but she forced herself to speak. "No, it's fine. I didn't expect to hear from you so soon." "I know this must be a bit of a shock," he replied, his voice unwavering. "But I've been following your journey, Evelyn. I know things haven't been easy for you, and I believe you have potential you might not even see in yourself." Evelyn's breath hitched. His words, though kind, sent a chill down her spine. How much did he know? How far had he been following her? And why? "I'm offering you a job," he continued, as if reading her mind. "It's a consulting position at Harland Technologies. It's lucrative and it's flexible. I believe you could bring a fresh perspective to some of our more sensitive projects." Evelyn's mind raced. The offer was more than she had ever imagined. A job at Harland Technologies, one of the most influential companies in the world? It was a lifeline, a way out of her financial ruin. The thought of being able to provide for Lucas, of having a steady income again, was almost too much to bear. But Evelyn hesitated, her voice barely above a whisper. "But why me? I'm not qualified for something like this. I've never worked in tech or business." There was a pause on the other end of the line before James spoke again, his voice softer now, as if speaking to someone who needed reassurance. "I know what you've been through, Evelyn. Your determination to survive, to protect your son, that's what matters to me. You've been through a lot, and I think you have a fire in you that many don't. I want to give you a chance to show that." His words sent a shockwave through her, leaving her speechless. She had always been the one doing the fighting, doing whatever it took to keep her family afloat. But hearing it from someone else, the recognition of her struggles, of her strength, was overwhelming. "I just need you to understand one thing," James continued, his tone now a bit more serious. "This job isn't for everyone. It's going to require a level of trust, Evelyn. There are sensitive projects I need you to handle, things that could shape the future of Harland Technologies. You'll be in a position to influence a lot, but you'll also need to keep things private. The work will require discretion." Evelyn's mind spun. It wasn't just a job. It was a responsibility, a weight she would carry. But the pay, the opportunity, it was too good to pass up. This could be the answer to everything. "Can you meet me tomorrow?" James asked, his voice steady. "We'll discuss the details in person." Evelyn swallowed hard, her heart hammering in her chest. "I'll be there," she said, her voice firm despite the uncertainty swirling inside her. The call ended with a soft click, leaving Evelyn standing in the kitchen, phone still in hand, her mind reeling from the unexpected turn her life had just taken. The next morning, Evelyn found herself standing in front of Harland Technologies' sleek, glass-covered building, feeling smaller than ever before. The building towered over her, a monument to success and influence. She had never seen anything like it in person. Everything about it screamed wealth and influence. Her hand tightened around her purse strap as she entered the building, her heart pounding in her chest. The lobby was spacious, with polished floors and minimalist decor. It was almost too pristine, like something out of a high-end magazine. She approached the reception desk, trying to quell the nerves that threatened to overtake her. "I'm here to see Mr. Harland," she said, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. The receptionist looked up at her with a polite smile. "Of course, Miss Carter. He's expecting you. Please follow me." Evelyn nodded, following the receptionist through the hallway, each step feeling heavier than the last. She tried to calm her racing thoughts, but the reality of the situation kept pushing its way to the forefront of her mind. She was about to meet James Harland, the man who had offered her a lifeline. The receptionist stopped in front of a large, imposing door, the kind that seemed designed to intimidate. She knocked lightly before opening it, revealing a spacious office with floor-to-ceiling windows. James Harland stood by the window, his back to her as he gazed out at the city below. He was tall, his figure imposing even from behind. His dark hair was neatly combed, and his tailored suit spoke of wealth and status. Everything about him exuded authority. He turned as she entered, his expression unreadable. "Evelyn, welcome," he said, his voice warm yet distant. "Please, have a seat." Evelyn sat down across from him, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as she tried to steady her breathing. The silence between them stretched for a moment before James spoke again. His gaze never left hers. "I'm glad you came. I believe this could be the start of something important for both of us." Evelyn nodded, her mind still racing. She had no idea what he truly wanted, but she knew one thing for sure. This opportunity could change everything.
Evelyn sat across from James Harland, the tension in the air palpable. She couldn't shake the feeling that the moment she had been waiting for, the moment that could change everything, had arrived. But she wasn't sure she was ready. Every inch of her body screamed for her to make sense of the situation, but all she could do was sit there, listening to the steady rhythm of her own heartbeat in her ears. James leaned back in his chair, his piercing eyes never leaving her face. He was so calm, so composed, and yet there was something about his presence that made her feel both uneasy and intrigued. His dark suit fit him perfectly, and the way he carried himself spoke volumes about the power he held. "I'm sure you have questions," James said, his voice low and steady. "I don't want to waste your time, Evelyn. I believe you're someone who values efficiency." Evelyn swallowed hard, nodding. "Yes," she said, her voice betraying the uncertainty that had been building inside her. "But I don't understand. You said you've been following me. Why? Why offer me this job?" James's gaze softened for a moment, and Evelyn could have sworn she saw something flicker in his eyes, something almost human, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "You're a fighter, Evelyn," he said, his tone serious. "I've watched you struggle, seen how you fought for your son. That strength, that perseverance, it's rare. It's what makes you different from everyone else." Evelyn's heart pounded in her chest. She'd heard these kinds of words before, but never from someone like James Harland. She had fought for survival, for Lucas, every single day. But to hear someone acknowledge that struggle, especially someone like him, felt almost surreal. James leaned forward, his hands clasped in front of him. "I'm sure you have things most people don't. Raw potential. You've lived through things most people can't even imagine. That kind of experience gives you insight that can't be bought." Evelyn opened her mouth to respond, but words failed her. She had spent so long living in the shadows, trying to hide her vulnerability, her weaknesses. Now this powerful man was telling her that those very things were what made her valuable. It didn't make sense, but it also made her heart race. James continued, his voice steady. "The position I'm offering you is not for the faint of heart. You'll be working on projects that are confidential, sensitive matters that could change the course of my company. Your job will require discretion, trust, and most importantly, you'll need to see beyond the surface of things. You've had to survive on your instincts, Evelyn. That's exactly what we need." Evelyn's mind swirled with the implications of his words. She had never worked in a corporate environment, let alone something as high stakes as what James was describing. But the offer was tempting. More than tempting. It was a lifeline. And it wasn't just the money that called to her. It was the opportunity to be someone who mattered, to take control of her life in a way she had never had before. "And what's the catch?" Evelyn asked, the words leaving her lips before she could stop them. James's lips curled into a small smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "There's no catch," he said, his voice cool, "but there are expectations. You'll be expected to keep things confidential. There will be times when you won't be able to tell anyone what you're working on, and you'll need to be prepared to face things you've never faced before." Evelyn felt a knot tighten in her stomach. What was he really offering her? She wasn't just taking a job. She was stepping into a world she didn't understand, one where the rules seemed different, more complicated. But could she afford to be picky? Could she afford to walk away? "I know it's a lot to take in," James said, his voice softer now, almost as if he was trying to reassure her. "But I believe in you, Evelyn. I wouldn't offer this to just anyone." His words sank deep into her chest. He believed in her. It was a strange thing to hear, a strange thing to feel. Her whole life had been about fighting, about keeping her head above water. She had never been anyone's priority. But here in this sterile, cold office, James Harland was telling her that she mattered. "What's the next step?" Evelyn asked, her voice steady, despite the turmoil inside her. James's eyes flickered with something akin to approval. "Meet me tomorrow, and we'll go over the details. I'll introduce you to the team, show you the scope of the work you'll be doing. We'll start small, but if you prove yourself, there's no limit to what you can achieve with Harland Technologies." Evelyn nodded, her mind still reeling from the enormity of the decision she was about to make. This was the chance she'd been waiting for, a chance to change everything. But was she ready for the consequences? As James stood to shake her hand, Evelyn felt a strange mix of fear and excitement flood her veins. She had always been the one fighting against the odds, but now she was being handed an opportunity that could turn the tide in her favor. She just hoped she wouldn't drown in the process. "I'll be there," she said, her voice unwavering. James's smile deepened, and for the briefest of moments, it seemed almost genuine. "I look forward to it, Evelyn." The following day,
Evelyn arrived at Harland Technologies with a sense of purpose. She had spent the night turning over the decision in her mind, playing out every possible scenario. But now, standing at the entrance of the building once more, she felt a sense of clarity settle over her. This was her chance. She took the elevator up to the top floor, where the doors opened to a sleek, modern space that seemed to hum with energy. The walls were lined with high-tech screens, and the air smelled faintly of polished wood and freshly brewed coffee. It was a world she had never imagined, but one she had always dreamed of being a part of. James was waiting for her in a conference room, his sharp eyes scanning her as she entered. "You're right on time," he said, his voice cool but not unkind. "Let's get started." For the next hour, Evelyn was shown the scope of the projects she would be working on, cutting-edge tech developments, innovative strategies that could reshape entire industries. It was all overwhelming, but in the best possible way. Every new detail only solidified her belief that this job could be her way out. As the meeting came to a close, James stood and offered his hand once more. "Welcome to Harland Technologies, Evelyn." Evelyn shook his hand, her mind still spinning from the enormity of it all. This was it, her chance to build a new life for herself and Lucas. It was a terrifying, thrilling prospect, and as she looked at James, his unreadable expression, she couldn't help but feel that there was more to this than met the eye. But for now, she had a job to do, and nothing, not even the uncertainty hanging in the air, could take that away.